Lights, fame, screams of millions. On the outside, the world sees perfection, flawless visuals, legendary stages, and the thunderous echoes of armies chanting their names in unison. But behind that dazzling curtain of global success lies a reality far more raw, far more human, and often far more heartbreaking. This is not just another K-pop ranking. This is not about who has the most lines, the sharpest moves, or the flashiest outfit. This is about who carried the heaviest emotional weight, who bled behind the curtain, who almost crumbled but kept dancing anyway. Because being a BTS member isn't just about singing and dancing, it's about surviving under 24/7 surveillance, being perfect even when you're broken, smiling while your world collapses off camera. Some members wore their wounds like armor. Others hid their battles so well, even ARMY didn't see the storm until much later. This isn't just a list, it's a reminder that every spotlight casts a shadow, and sometimes, those shadows stretch deeper than we know. We're diving into the emotional battlefield of BTS, unfiltered, unscripted, unforgettable. From soul-crushing self-doubt to the crushing pressure of carrying a nation's pride, we'll uncover the truths behind the fame, the ones who suffered silently, the ones who almost quit, the ones who faced scandals, rumors, trauma, and still stood back up. These are the stories that turned boys into legends. So buckle up. This journey isn't glamorous, it's real, and by the time we hit number 1, you might find yourself crying, cheering, and seeing BTS in a whole new light. Because this is not about popularity, it's about pain, resilience, and the raw cost of being an idol in the world's most watched boy band. Let's begin. Number 7. RM, the weight of the world's expectations. From the very beginning, Kim Namjoon wasn't just in BTS, he led it. As RM, the leader of the world's biggest boy band, he bore a pressure that most of us couldn't begin to comprehend. Imagine being barely out of your teenage years and having to speak not only for yourself, but for 6 other dreamers, for a company on the brink of collapse, and later for an entire generation. RM's burden wasn't just about performance, it was psychological warfare against the world's expectations. Fluent in English, often appointed as the group's spokesperson, RM found himself caught between being the brain of BTS and simply being a young man trying to breathe. In the early days, RM was frequently misunderstood. Critics called him too philosophical, too weird, even too ugly. Yes, those were real insults thrown at him during the rookie era. But what no one saw was the incredible pressure he placed on himself to represent BTS with dignity in interviews, to carry the group's messages with clarity and strength. During their early US promotions, while others were still adjusting to time zones and stage setups, RM was memorizing scripts, answering impromptu press questions, and being the linguistic bridge to the Western world. He didn't just translate, he represented. And every misstep felt like a global embarrassment waiting to happen. There were moments when RM would spend nights alone writing lyrics that questioned his worth. He once admitted that the more famous BTS became, the more he lost touch with who Kim Namjoon really was. Imagine trying to stay grounded when your name trends worldwide every time you speak good or bad. And yet, he always had to appear calm, centered, and wise beyond his years. That pressure to be the philosopher idol, the poetic leader, the bulletproof brain behind Bangtan, it aged him emotionally faster than anyone realized. Let's not forget the emotional toll of mistakes. Every time one of the members faced backlash, RM internalized it. He saw it as his fault. He wasn't just responsible for leading the team, he held himself responsible for protecting them. That kind of guilt, quiet and invisible, gnawed at him for years. And while he rarely broke down on camera, RM's solo work, like in Mono, tells a different story. Lyrics drenched in existential dread, in longing, in quiet despair. That wasn't just art, that was confession. And yet, RM continued to carry himself with elegance, with strength, with poetic courage. He guided BTS through political stages like the UN, where his speech about loving oneself became a global cultural milestone. But even then, behind that well-articulated brilliance, there was a man who sometimes couldn't love himself. Who doubted if he was still an artist or just a brand leader? Who went on forest retreats not for fun, but to escape the noise and find the boy who once rapped under the name Runch Randa? Being RM meant being everything at once: leader, translator, emotional compass, lightning rod, artist, protector. And it came at a cost: the erosion of personal peace. Still, he stood tall. Still, he writes. Still, he leads. But now, finally, he's also learning to let go, to breathe, to be Namjoon, not just RM. That's why he's here at number 7, because while others fought battles on stage, RM fought his mostly in silence, behind the scenes, behind the mic, behind the leader's smile. Number 6. J-Hope, the smile that hid 1,000 burdens. If Sunshine had a name, many would say it's Jung Ho-sok, better known as J-Hope. On the surface, he's the bright energy, the dance captain, the never-tiring hype engine of BTS. But behind every vibrant scream of, "I'm your hope, you're my hope," lies a story so layered, so full of hidden heartbreaks and invisible responsibilities, that it's often overlooked simply because he never showed the cracks. J-Hope's burden wasn't loud. It was hidden behind professionalism so flawless, it nearly cost him his sense of self. From debut, Ho-sok wasn't the typical fan favorite. Critics doubted his visuals, netizens questioned his inclusion in the group. Imagine training your entire life in dance, pouring sweat and tears into movement only to be labeled unnecessary by the harsh eyes of the internet. In the early years, many even asked, what does J-Hope do? What they didn't know was that J-Hope was the backbone of BTS's live performance quality. He was the one drilling choreography until 3 a.m., fixing formations, pushing members past their limits, including himself. He wasn't just dancing. He was sculpting a legacy. But what happens when you're always the motivator? When you're always the happy one, even on days you feel broken? J-Hope once admitted that being the group's moodmaker felt like a duty, not a choice. He would bottle his pain, his exhaustion, even his own sadness, just so others wouldn't feel burdened. That level of emotional suppression takes a toll, slowly, quietly. And it was only years later, during the Burn the Stage documentary, that fans finally saw glimpses of that inner turmoil. The pressures didn't end there. J-Hope's solo work, particularly his Hope World album, was met with both praise and surprising indifference. Despite being a core performer and creative mind in BTS, his solo releases didn't get the mainstream spotlight others received. The message was subtle, but it was there. People loved Happy Ho-sok, but weren't sure how to handle the artist. The raw, darker, more experimental version of him seen in Jack in the Box was not the Ho-sok the world expected. That dissonance between public image and personal truth became another invisible weight he carried. And still, he stayed humble. When his father, once skeptical of his dream, finally attended a BTS concert, J-Hope cried backstage. Not on camera. Not for show. Just finally letting himself be human. Letting himself be a son, not a superstar. That's the thing about J-Hope. He never demanded attention. He just kept giving energy, discipline, warmth until he had nothing left in the tank. Let's not forget, during times of group instability, it was J-Hope who took the lead in practices, in preparation, in pushing for excellence. He was the invisible leader, in many ways, making sure the visual impact of BTS matched their vocal and lyrical brilliance. But rarely was he celebrated for it. Being in the middle of a group full of loud, diverse, powerful personalities, J-Hope became the glue. And glue never shines, but it holds everything together. In 2022, when he was the first BTS member to headline a major music festival, Lollapalooza, the world finally saw the solo power of J-Hope. But even then, his heart was full of anxiety. He confessed he was afraid of failing, of not meeting expectations, of not being enough. The man who never cracked on stage was finally letting the world see the tremble beneath the smile. That's why J-Hope stands at number 6. Because sometimes, the heaviest burdens are worn with the biggest smiles. And the ones who seem like they have it all together are the ones who fight the hardest to stay afloat quietly, consistently, beautifully. Number 5. Jin, the oldest, yet the most alone. From the outside, Seokjin was always the funny one, the guy with the dad jokes, the one who made others laugh when the tension in the room could be cut with a knife. He was the eldest, the so-called young, expected to be mature, supportive, and strong. But what happens when the one who's supposed to hold everyone up feels the most left out? Jin's burden wasn't always visible. In fact, it was often dismissed. He was labeled the visual, the worldwide handsome, the comic relief. But if you really watched him, if you paid attention during interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, or award speeches, you'd start to notice a pattern. Jin was often overlooked, undercredited, and emotionally isolated. That's the cruel irony of being the funny guy. People forget to check if you're okay because they assume you're always fine. In the early BTS days, Jin entered Big Hit as an actor. He wasn't a dancer. He wasn't a rapper. He wasn't even a trained vocalist when he started. And because of that, he faced ridicule. Netizens questioned why he was even part of the group. People called him the weakest link. Imagine stepping into a storm of talent and being told you're the mistake. The pressure to prove himself wasn't just artistic, it was deeply personal. Jin pushed through injuries. He spent countless hours behind closed doors, training his voice until his throat gave out. He trained in choreography despite being a late starter, often taking longer to pick up routines than the others. And yet, he never let that frustration show. Instead, he smiled, joked, and encouraged others. Because that's what an eldest brother does, right? But even as BTS rose to global fame, Jin's struggles didn't end. When the world finally noticed BTS, many still dismissed him as just a face. His vocals, which evolved into one of the most emotionally powerful in the group, were rarely highlighted. His solo songs like Epiphany and Abyss carried layers of personal grief, burnout, and self-worth issues, but the mainstream rarely dug deep enough to understand them. Jin often carried the loneliness of being the invisible backbone, the one who never caused trouble, the one who never cried in public, the one who quietly kept things from falling apart, but received little credit for doing so. It's easy to forget that sometimes the ones who complain the least are suffering the most. He once admitted in an interview that he didn't think he was as good as the others, that he constantly felt like he had to catch up even after years of success. That imposter syndrome doesn't just fade with awards and stadiums. In fact, the bigger BTS became, the more Jin had to fight the voice inside that whispered, "You don't belong." And then came the pressure of being the eldest. In a group where age hierarchy still matters, Jin was expected to lead with maturity, but also make way for younger members to shine. He was stuck in a limbo, not old enough to be distant, not young enough to be carefree. That role, that constant need to adjust his presence to fit what the group needed, often left him emotionally isolated. When military enlistment finally loomed over BTS, Jin didn't hesitate. He stepped forward first. Why? Because he wanted to protect the group's image. Because he didn't want rumors or legal issues to tarnish BTS. Because he believed in taking responsibility, even if it meant pausing everything he had worked for. That moment alone shows the kind of quiet, heavy burden Jin has always carried. Number 5 isn't about being underrated, it's about being unseen. Jin bore the weight of invisibility, of being everyone's anchor without ever asking for recognition. And that, perhaps, is the loneliest burden of all. Number 4. Jimin, the fragile flame that refused to die. Park Jimin, the angelic voice, the graceful dancer, the one who bows 90 degrees even when no one's looking. But behind the dazzling stage presence, the ethereal visuals, and the heart-melting fan service lies a past stained with brutal self-judgment, ruthless body scrutiny, and emotional collapse. Among all BTS members, Jimin's journey has been the most visibly painful and yet, the most quietly endured. Let's start from the beginning. Jimin trained in contemporary dance, a discipline rooted in control, emotion, and extreme body awareness. He came into Big Hit with a technical grace that stunned instructors, but ironically almost didn't debut. That's right. Jimin was nearly cut multiple times. Why? Because some thought he didn't fit the idol mold. The thought of almost losing his dream not because of talent, but because of misfit perception lit a fire in him that never went out, but that fire also started burning him from the inside. Once he debuted, Jimin set an impossibly high standard for himself. He wasn't just good, he wanted to be perfect. And perfection, in his mind, came at any cost. He would stay up alone after practice, repeating routines until his body collapsed. He skipped meals. He punished himself for small mistakes no one else noticed. During their early years, he would cry backstage after performances, not because the group failed, but because he felt he failed them. Then came the body image war. Jimin once dropped below 50 kilograms during a dangerously strict diet. Fans celebrated his sharp jawline and killer abs, not realizing the man behind those abs was starving himself, physically and emotionally. In Burn the Stage, we saw one of the rare moments of breakdown Jimin, exhausted, slumped in a chair, whispering that he's okay when clearly, he's anything but. That wasn't just stress. That was silent suffering in real time. Let's not forget the hate. Despite his hard work, Jimin was the target of relentless online bullying. Malicious comments dissected his face, his voice, his body, calling him too feminine, weak, or worse. And yet, he never fought back. He internalized it. He channeled it into his art, into heartbreakingly honest songs like Lie and Promise. Songs where the lyrics themselves sound like they're begging for mercy from his own reflection. And then there's his role within BTS, the emotional glue. Jimin has always been the one who feels the most. He senses the mood of the room before anyone else. He comforts, he listens, he absorbs. But being everyone's emotional sponge is exhausting. It's a burden that drains you without anyone noticing. And Jimin? He never asked for help. He just kept smiling even when his eyes looked hollow. His emotional sensitivity made him deeply attached to the members. And that made separation, criticism, and even fan wars hit harder. Remember when Jimin cried during Spring Day rehearsals? Not because of the choreography, but because the lyrics reminded him of a lost friend? That's the kind of wound he carries quietly, deeply. Not for show, for real. As BTS grew, Jimin faced new challenges, constantly evolving expectations, pressure to outdo his last performance, and the terror of losing himself in the noise of fame. And yet, every stage he touches, every note he sings, every bow he takes, is a rebellion against those who said he wasn't enough. It's his way of saying, "I'm still here. I survived." And let's not forget his military enlistment. Even there, Jimin faced emotional turbulence, watching fans celebrate his success while he quietly stepped into duty, wondering if the world would still remember him when he returns. And yet even now, armies hang on to his every letter, every photo, every whisper from the shadows. Jimin doesn't scream when he's in pain. He doesn't demand the spotlight. He simply endures. He transforms hurt into beauty. That's why he's not just a performer. He's a warrior wrapped in velvet. That's why he's number 4, because pain never broke him. It just made him more radiant, like a flame that dances in the wind, but never dies. Number 3, Suga, the silent storm that refused to disappear. Min Yoongi, the calmest face on stage, the most composed voice in interviews, the man who rarely smiled unless it was real. But if you thought Suga was simply cold or stoic, you've missed the entire point of his existence. Because this man didn't just fight hardship, he survived it in silence, with scars so deep, they bled into every lyric he ever wrote. Suga didn't ask for sympathy. He demanded honesty, and he paid for it in ways the world will never fully understand. Before BTS, Min Yoongi was an underground rapper in Daegu. Not just passionate hungry, he wrote, produced, and performed not for fame, but for survival. Coming from a low-income family, music wasn't just a dream, it was an escape. He once worked part-time delivering food on a motorcycle to pay the bills, and during one rainy delivery, he got into a crash. The accident shattered his shoulder, dislocated it so severely that it would haunt him for years, but he didn't tell Big Hit. He was afraid they'd cut him, so he lied. He said it was minor, and he kept training, kept dancing, kept lifting his broken arm just to stay in the group. That wasn't ambition, that was sacrifice. Debut didn't make things easier. Suga was labeled as lazy, expressionless, even rude. People couldn't understand him, and instead of asking, they attacked. But what no one saw was that he was already fighting battles in his head. Suga has openly spoken about his mental health, a revolutionary act in a country where such topics are taboo. He's confessed to struggling with depression, anxiety, and social phobia. His mixtape August D wasn't just music, it was a journal of emotional warfare, every track a confession soaked in pain, confusion, and fury. But even as he gave the world his truth, the world wasn't always kind. Being an idol meant he had to wear makeup, smile on cue, do variety shows, all things that drained his energy. He wasn't fake, he was exhausted. Suga once said, "I don't want people to think I'm okay when I'm not," and yet, he still stood on stage, still produced hit after hit, still delivered verses that cut through lies like a knife. Because while others tried to escape their darkness, Suga used his. His shoulder injury, it got worse. Years of silence and pushing through pain led to a point where he couldn't lift his arm properly. Still, he kept performing. Only in 2020 did he finally get surgery, and even then, he apologized to ARMY for not being able to perform. He apologized for being human. That's how deep his sense of responsibility ran. And let's talk about the psychological burden of being the producer. Behind the scenes, Yoongi was composing, mixing, mastering. He wasn't just an idol, he was the sonic architect of BTS. The pressure to deliver, to innovate, to express 7 voices through one beat that's an invisible load no one else could carry. He worked through sleepless nights, often alone, obsessing over every detail. Because for Suga, art wasn't just passion, it was therapy, and sometimes, therapy hurts. His lyrics weren't sugar-coated. The last, "So far away, dear my friend," they were raw letters to his own soul, admitting everything society told him to hide. He told fans that it was okay to feel broken, okay to feel lost. And, in doing so, he became a voice for millions who had no words of their own. Yet despite all this, he rarely asked for attention. He stood in the back, let others take the spotlight, nodded quietly while the world praised BTS. But when he spoke in that low, soft tone, you listened, because you knew every word came from fire, forged in loneliness, sharpened by trauma. Even in his recent solo tours as August D, you could see it, the weight, the introspection, the transformation of pain into performance. He wasn't trying to be cool, he was trying to be real, and he was. That's why Suga is number 3, because his burden wasn't flashy, it wasn't always visible, but it was heavy, constant, and personal, and he carried it not with tears but with truth. In his silence, he screamed for every broken soul who needed to hear that even storms can find peace. Number 2. Jungkook, the Golden Maknae, who nearly broke beneath the crown. Jungkook, the Golden Maknae, the all-rounder, The one who can dance, sing, rap, draw, shoot, edit, box, paint, lift, and still find time to break millions of hearts with a single smirk. But what happens when you're too perfect, too watched, too expected too much of everything for your own good? Jungkook's story isn't just about talent. It's about the crushing weight of being everyone's everything, all the time, and the slow unraveling of a young boy who became a legend before he even understood who he really was. Let's rewind. Jungkook debuted at just 15 years old. Think about that. At an age when most teens are still figuring out who they are, Jungkook was tossed into a world of flashing cameras, brutal schedules, and unrealistic expectations. His Hyungs, already in their late teens and 20s, the company, hanging by a thread, and Jungkook, expected to grow up faster than time would allow. The moment he stepped on stage, he wasn't just a kid anymore, he was the future of BTS, and he knew it. The label, Golden Maknae, wasn't just a compliment, it became a prison. Every time he improved at something, fans wanted more. Every time he cried, cameras zoomed in. Every time he so much as breathed, headlines followed. The world watched him grow up in real time. And no, not just watched, judged. His acne during puberty, mocked. His shyness, ridiculed. His every move, down to what he wore, or who he looked at, dissected like a specimen. Being adored didn't protect him from being dehumanized. And the pressure, it wasn't just public, it was personal. Jungkook idolized his Hyungs, especially RM, Jimin, and Suga. He wanted to be useful, wanted to earn his spot, so he trained harder than anyone, slept less, worked more. His discipline bordered on obsession. He would repeat vocal runs until his throat burned, practice footwork until his knees buckled, and never ever did he say it was too much, because he didn't want to be the youngest, he wanted to be worthy. But that kind of drive comes with a price. Jungkook began to tie his self-worth to performance. If he sang well, he mattered. If he hit the move, he was valuable. But the moment he faltered, the shame swallowed him whole. Remember that one time he missed a note and apologized profusely for days? That wasn't PR. That was a young man raised to believe that anything less than perfect meant failure. And let's talk about the breakdowns. Literally. There are videos ones that break your heart of Jungkook collapsing on stage from exhaustion. Not once, but multiple times. And what did he do after? He apologized. With tears in his eyes, he told fans he was sorry for making them worry. That is not a normal burden for a 20-year-old to carry. That is the kind of pressure that doesn't just bend you, it fractures you from within. Then came the scandals, the tattoos, the nightlife, the dating rumors. Suddenly, Jungkook wasn't just a cute bunny anymore, he was controversial. And fans split into two camps. Those who defended his right to grow, and those who demanded he remain the innocent baby forever. He was punished for maturing, for being human. The boy who spent a decade being everyone's little brother was now dragged for stepping outside the idol image, for dancing shirtless, for daring to show freedom. And yet, through all that he stayed, he sang through the hate, he danced through the burnout. He evolved, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. And when BTS faced the hardest transitions, the hiatus, the enlistments, the solo waves, Jungkook didn't run. He became the fire that kept the fandom burning. His solo music broke records. His vulnerability in interviews stunned even seasoned hosts. And his tears, once symbols of insecurity, became signs of a man finally claiming his own voice. He once said, "I'm not perfect, I have so much to learn, but I'll try my best." That wasn't modesty, that was a declaration of war against everything that tried to crush him. He's not just the Golden Maknae. He's the Diamond Maknae formed under unbearable pressure, cut 1,000 times, and still shining. That's why Jungkook is number 2. Because the world tried to own him, and he chose to own himself instead. Number 1. Taehyung, the idol who couldn't breathe behind the mask. Kim Taehyung, better known to the world as V, has always been a mystery. The box you couldn't label, the emotion you couldn't quite describe. From the very start, he was different, his voice deep like the night sky, his expressions unreadable, his thoughts a labyrinth. But that uniqueness came with a cost, a cruel cost. And no member in BTS bore the burden of identity, loss, and artistic suffocation like he did. When BTS first debuted, V wasn't even in the member introduction trailers. He was a hidden member. Imagine training for years, pouring your soul into rehearsals, knowing your dream is about to come true, but being told you're not allowed to tell the world. He sat in silence as fans speculated about the lineup, watching his brothers get spotlight after spotlight, while he remained a secret. That kind of emotional isolation leaves a mark, and it never really healed. After debut, fans immediately noticed something different about him. He was quirky, strange, even. He'd zone out during interviews, say random things, dance in his own rhythm. Some loved it. Others mocked it. But what they didn't know was that Taehyung wasn't trying to be eccentric, he was trying to stay sane, because inside his mind was a storm of thoughts, emotions, memories, and grief that no one could see. One of the heaviest tragedies Taehyung ever carried happened in complete silence. The passing of his grandmother, the woman who raised him. He found out about her death while BTS was on tour. He went on stage, performed in front of thousands, and didn't tell anyone until after the show. Let that sink in. The most devastating moment of his life, and he bottled it for us. For the fans. For the team. That's not just professionalism. That's trauma management, and it aged him emotionally in a way few could grasp. But the pressure didn't stop. As BTS rose to unimaginable fame, Taehyung's image became contradictory. On one hand, he was seen as the face adored for his stunning visuals, his vintage taste, his Gucci-drenched fashion. But on the other hand, he was labeled the strange one. Industry execs didn't know how to market him, netizens couldn't figure him out. And armies, while devoted, sometimes split in their understanding of who Taehyung really was. That kind of identity crisis of being loved but never understood can crush even the strongest minds. He once confessed in a rare emotional moment, "Sometimes, I don't even know who Kim Taehyung is anymore." He looked tired, not physically, spiritually, because being V meant smiling in photo shoots while questioning your entire self in private. It meant giving fans the most soothing voice in singularity or stigma, while hiding your own. And then came the pressure of his artistry. Taehyung is a painter, a photographer, a jazz lover, a quiet philosopher, none of which the mainstream K-pop machine knew what to do with. His ideas were often too weird, his aesthetics too niche. And so, he had to fight. For creative control, for solo identity, for space to breathe. His mixtape years in the making became a symbol of that internal battle. Not rushed, not forced, just him, raw and real. But his pain wasn't just internal. Let's talk about the vicious rumors, dating scandals, fan wars, even mental health speculations. Every time he posted something cryptic or emotional, the internet exploded. He couldn't grieve publicly. He couldn't express sadness without people assuming something was wrong. The boy who once danced freely in hotel hallways became the man who second-guessed every word he typed. That's not growth. That's what fame theft looks like when the world slowly steals your freedom to be human. Taehyung once said, "I want to be someone's comfort." And he is for millions. But who's his comfort? Who soothes him when the curtains close? When the cameras stop? When even his own fans split into factions debating his choices, his style, his silence? The answer is no one. Except music. Except stage. Except those rare, stolen moments where he lets the mask fall just a little and we see Kim Taehyung, not V. That's why he's number one. Because no other member carried such a tangled, aching burden of being too much and never enough at the same time. Because no one else had to become a myth just to survive the truth. Because in every whisper of his voice, every blink in his art, every step he takes through the fog of idolhood, Taehyung is reminding us that sometimes, the greatest battle is staying yourself when the world wants to rewrite you.